Bonjour à tous. I won't speak in French, just to try to be efficient. My Norwegian is not yet perfect, so I will speak in English, but of course, after Karen, it's not so easy for me. And not just talking about my bad English, but about all what Karen has said. Just to be clear, I fully agree with everything. So my challenge is to say something else to you. So I will try to take advantage of the fact that in 2019, this year, it is our birthday for our agency. We have been created 10 years ago, and it is interesting to look back and to see all what have changed during those 10 years. And if I even go back 20 years ago, as you said, I used to be an happy cryptographer, doing research, doing crypto, not talking about cyber. Even the word was not really used at this time, 20 years ago. And, well, everything was simple. We were just a few people dealing with information assurance, just for very special application for the government, for the military, for the diplomacy. And it was quite easy. We were not aware of it at this time, but it was easy. Then things get wrong. Well, very positive things happened. Digital society developed, everything changed, and the dark side of digital society also developed, even faster probably. But Karen mentioned it very precisely. So the question was raised in France in 2008. Every 5 years, we make a kind of strategic review of all the risks, military risks, health risks, all the horrible things that can happen in a nation like France. And in 2008, for the first time, we talked about cyber into this very important document. And maybe an important fact that happened 1 year before was the attack against Estonia in 2007. Just because, well, you know Estonia, they considered that they had to make a strong choice, so digital would be their choice, and they experiment what could happen if the security was not at the right level. And it is even more important when you face some frightening countries that can use it, of course, against you. So 2007, Estonian attacks, also other attacks, strategic work in 2008, and we obtained two conclusions. Well, three conclusions. The first one is that 10 years ago, cyber was immediately considered as one of the three major threats on France, with usual things like ballistic rockets, nuclear rockets, things like that, and other classical military threats. But cyber immediately became part of the top three of the threats. And we had to do two things. First, develop a real capacity to deal with this new threat. And the year after, our agency was created. And we should develop our offensive capacities in France. It is public. It was public 10 years ago. And we need both. We need offense and defense. But the choice we made at this time was that we should not mix the two missions. It would be very, very difficult, at least in France, to mix the two missions. It would be inefficient, and we would have a great problem of trust with all the stakeholders we want to work with if we mix the two missions. So that's the reason why our agency only do prevention, protection, defense, call it as you want. We are not an intelligence service. We don't do offense. But we talk and we work with the people who have this mission. The other idea at this time, 10 years ago, a very long time ago, was that cyber cannot be cached by just one area, one minister, one administration. Cyber would be more and more something that should be handled by all the society, all the domains. Of course, Ministry of Defense in France has been doing cyber for a long time. Ministry of Interior is working on cyber to deal with cyber criminality. More and more, Ministry of Justice is developing its capacity to avoid cyber crimes remaining non-treated attacks, crimes. But we know that everybody needs to work in this domain. So we need to have someone in charge of making the cooperation possible between all those administrations. And this entity is our agency in France. The other thing is that we have to avoid everybody developing the same thing for different areas. A very good example is detection of the attacks. Of course, we could ask to all the ministries to develop their own system of detection, but it would be inefficient, costly and inefficient. So we decided to centralize, to mutualize all the possible development into our agency. So that's the reason why we are directly related to the Prime Minister in France. Well, it is possible in France to do this. So this is the basic idea we had. But we also made mistakes at this time, because we considered that, okay, we need to make priorities. Everybody, every company, every citizen can be a victim of cyber attacks. And every day we see victims. So we have to make priorities. So 10 years ago, we considered that we first need to protect the state against state actors. It was a mistake because, in fact, we don't want to protect the state. We need to protect the nation. And the nation is not the state. And that's the time where we observed that the top priority is to protect critical infrastructures. They can be public, they can be private. Well, the attackers don't mind if they are public or private. They just want to obtain strong effects. So we need to protect first critical infrastructures. And how to do this? It's easy to say, okay, we need to protect, but how to do it in practice? Because, well, cyber was not well understood. I'm not sure it is well understood today, but at this time it was not understood at all by the private companies, by the big sensitive administrations. Just doing advice is not efficient because, okay, you give advice, you convince people, but after you need money, you need means, you need people, and so on, so advice is not enough. So that's the reason why, in 2013, we convinced quite easily the Parliament that we should use regulation, we should use the law in order to convince those critical infrastructures to protect themselves. Well, to be honest, in France we like regulation, so it's not so difficult to use this way. But the interesting thing is not that we use regulation, but the way we used it. Because, okay, if we just add more constraints to people who already have many, many constraints in all the domains, it's probably not efficient. And we want to be efficient. The way we did it was to use the fact that now it is mandatory, now we have a law, they have to do it to be sure that we have a real cooperation with those critical infrastructures. And we also took advantage of the fact that at this time in France, there were an existing list of critical infrastructures. And it helps, of course, because if you start from zero just trying to develop the mechanism, the process, and at the same time trying to write a list of people who will be concerned by this regulation, it's very difficult to do both at the same time. So we use the existing list of critical infrastructures that was drawn having in mind the fact that, okay, there are some critical things against usual threats, usual physical security threats. Energy sector is critical in France, like everywhere, I think. Telco is critical, because today and even more tomorrow, telco networks will be as sensitive as electricity networks. The industry is critical. Transportation is very, very critical. The threats are not the same, of course, but we know that transportation can be targeted, for example, by terrorist attacks, with a huge effect, huge terrorist effect. Well, and so on. We have a list like this of critical sectors and critical actors into those sectors. So what we said this time was, okay, you are critical, and now you are going to do cyber with us. It has been a bit surprise for them, but they understood that it was their interest to do it, because at this time, okay, the CEOs, the head of those big companies, they also read the press, they also exchange with their counterparts, and they observed that there were more and more attacks against them. And what we did, we wrote the list of mandatory rules that apply to them in cooperation. It was a very interesting moment, but quite efficient. And finally, okay, what we wrote is just obvious things. You have to master your networks. You have to have a governance of your systems. You have to take care of your own cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is no longer something just for experts with whom we don't want to talk because we don't understand what they do. Cybersecurity is really a matter for all the people who decide, either they are in the public or the private sector. We also said that everybody must be involved into this discussion. Awareness is very, very important. The goal is not to transform every citizen, every employee into a cyber expert. Life would become awful. But everybody must avoid to make big mistakes. We must avoid, as single persons, we must avoid to help the attackers. And if we don't care, we really help the attackers. And we also set up more technical rules to protect the systems. It should be very clear that the best defense remains an efficient defense. It's a bit frustrating. And when I talk with people from the army, it's very, very frustrating because in France, we like to say that the best defense is offense and so on. Well, no, for cyber it doesn't work. It's too late. So the best defense is efficient defense. And we need to develop a real capacity of detection. I have so many stories of real victims who discover that they have been attacked, but not today, not yesterday. They have been attacked for months, years sometimes, with people reading all their documents, all their emails for years. And in such situations, it's impossible to even imagine the consequences, the real consequences for the victims. And the last thing is that on those rules, we push the victims to prepare very bad events, to prepare for the attacks. We know that the attacks will take place, will happen. And we also know that a victim that have prepared this, of course praying not to use it, but sometimes it is very useful, such victims are much more efficient than others. And what you have to prepare is, of course, what do you do for your main IT systems to be sure that they are resilient, that you can still work even if you attack. But also prepare things like crisis communication. We know that if you don't prepare communication, you say silly things when you attack. And the consequences are even worse than the single attack itself. In terms of image, of trust with your clients, with your partners, the consequences can be even much worse than the attack itself. So that's what we did during the past years. Now we are in a situation where the big potential victims have understood, have reacted, and the challenges are now to be sure that a third actor, a third stakeholder, can provide enough solutions. I talk about the private sector. Cyber is not just a link between the state, the administration, and the potential victims. We are three in the room. The private actors are very, very important. We need them. We need them to produce secure systems, secure products. And today, not yet the case. We need them to produce security products, things that can be used efficiently to protect ourselves. And we need them to provide security services. Most of the time, cybersecurity is a matter of service. We need people able to do audits. And those people, they must be skilled, of course, and they must be trusted. Otherwise, the solution is even worse. We need people who are able to detect the attacks. I often explain to big companies that they should not try to do it by themselves. It is so difficult to do it. And with Kian, we have this experience. Very difficult to detect high-level attacks. We need people to be able to help for incident response. It's a real job to do incident response. So we need this private sector, and we consider that our role in this situation is to be able to certify, to say, okay, those guys, this white list of companies, they are skilled and they can be trusted. And after it's a private agreement, and I don't want to know how it costs and so on, but our role is to say, okay, those guys, you can trust them and you can work with them. So we are just at the beginning. We have to develop this, but we consider it is a good direction. There are so many things to say. I would just like to spot a few key challenges we have today. The first one is that the threat is keep on evolving. And it will not stop in the next years. Today we observe that more and more the attacks are complex, of course, efficient, yes, but the goal of the attacks is also evolving. Even in cybercriminality, the new ransomwares, for example, we have been used to ransomwares not so well operated, with small ransoms trying to get money from many, many victims. Today, and maybe really today in a way, with one of your companies, we observe that big victims are targeted by criminals who want to obtain probably big ransoms and doing very targeted attacks. We experimented this in France during last month, and well, we have to face this new threat, and we observe that there are many potential victims that are not yet ready to react efficiently in front of this. What we also observe is that, okay, the most agile stakeholders, most old agile ones, are the attackers themselves. For years, they have tried to get into the systems of their direct target. Today, it's more difficult. Okay, so the first target, the IT providers, the service providers, the supply chain, and through the supply chain, they can finally obtain what they want. I mean, data, information, which is into the big companies they want to target. They can no longer attack them directly, so they cannot go through the door, they go through the window. This is very true during those months. We have observed, also in cooperation with NCSC, some common victims that has been attacked with this kind of new mode of operation. The last thing is that it is more and more difficult. It has always been difficult to know who is really attacking. I consider it is more and more difficult because all those weapons, digital weapons, they are just spreading all over the internet. So saying who is behind an attack is very difficult. Of course, most of the time we know who it is, but we have no real proof. So we can say to our authorities, okay, we consider this, this, and this, but it's difficult to make it public, at least from a French point of view. And there are many other topics that are not directly cybersecurity, but that are related to cybersecurity. 5G, interesting topic, 5G. It's not only a matter of cybersecurity, but there are some cybersecurity questions when we deal with the security of the next generation telco networks. Information manipulation. When people manipulate social networks, they don't do cyber attacks. But some of those attackers, they are very clever to combine cyber attacks with information manipulation, use of social networks, use of traditional medias. So we have something, we have to be involved also, even if it's not easy for us, because manipulation and so on is not our job. Dealing on this is not our job. Artificial intelligence. Well, it's not a matter of cyber, but it can be used by the attackers. It can also be used by the people who protect the systems. I'm convinced that detection is a direct application for artificial intelligence. And there are more tricky things. People who develop artificial intelligence, okay, sometimes I have a feeling they are developing it as we developed the internet a long time ago. So it is developed by the smart people, but they do not always see the bad aspects, the dark side. We know today that it is not so difficult to poison an artificial intelligence while it is trained. We know that just modifying a bit some data during the training phases can have great impact, very bad impact on the result. So it's not really cyber, but not so far. We have to work on this. And the last topic, just like this, encryption. So you said I'm a former cryptographer. So of course, I'm fond of encryption from a technical point of view. We need encryption, but we also observe that people in charge of, people from the police, from justice, who just want to make their job, in some situations they need to be able to access some data, and today they face many difficulties with encryption. So what is the conclusion? I often repeat that, okay, there's a difficulty with encryption. It is not a reason to try to make it less efficient or to forbid encryption. It would be nonsense. The consequences would be awful for all our security. But we face real challenges. How can we make encryption efficient against bad guys, but not so efficient against good guys? Well, you understand that such a debate is, of course, very, very complex. Last thing, we are working on a very technical domain, but it's a matter of human beings. We need to convince people who decide, we need to convince people who use IT that they are real actors. They must be involved into this process. They must not become experts. but they must consider that, okay, now cyber is a small part, should be a small part of their life, professional life, private life, and we need the help of all those people, everybody, to be sure that our digital world will develop on the right way and that the dark side of digital will not become more and more important as we observe today. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. A strong thought for Kjetil Nielsen, our Norwegian counterpart, very nice guy who does a great job. And I hope you will have a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.